we can start with the introductions, and by the time you're
Cool,
done.
cool. Yeah, I see there are around 15 people. Hopefully more will join.
And yeah.
Okay, so I think it's a good idea to start the seminar on time. Well, it's a pleasure to have Enghin Atalay with us today for seminar. Enghin is a senior economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, and previously he was an assistant professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Enghin completed his PhD from the University of Chicago, and his areas of interest are economic networks, the boundaries of the firm, and changes in occupations, task, and technology profiles. Enghin is a prolific researcher, as you may have seen from his bio. He has published in top economic and science journals like QJE, AER, and PNAS, to name a few. Today, Enghin will be presenting his recent working paper on firm technology upgrading through emerging work. Enghin, welcome once again. You have 1 hour and 15 minutes in total, including questions. You can choose to take questions on the go or towards the end. With that, the floor is yours, Enghin.
Okay, thanks so much for the very kind introduction and for inviting me to give this talk. So this is joint work with my co-author Sharda, who is at the University of Wisconsin. And being at the Federal Reserve, I have to include this disclaimer, which is at the bottom, that these research results are my own views and not of the Federal Reserve. And so yes, please do. I would love to take your questions as we go along. And I know kind of in these virtual talks, it's maybe a little bit difficult to kind of like jump in with questions. So I'll pause every couple of slides to give kind of an opportunity for people to ask, but please interrupt me as well. Okay, so in kind of very, in a nutshell, what is this paper about? Well, what we're going to do in this paper is to try and understand something about the technologies that firms are using when they're producing, and the way that we're going to gain a new way to look at that is through the job ads that firms are posting. And our main idea is that when firms are placing advertisements looking for new workers, they're sending out, okay, they're sending out a message, okay, we want to hire this type of worker. And because many of the employer-employee relationships that are going to come out of these matches are long-lived, may last several periods, they're also going to give a signal to us as the researcher of the firm's aspirations for what they're going to be looking like over the next 5 or 10 or however many years that match survives. So in a nutshell, when we're going to use these job advertisements as a new way to learn about the firm's kind of the technologies that it'll be adopting within that match. So just to make this a little bit more concrete, let me give you an example of 2 firms that will appear in our data set. So these are 2 computer manufacturing firms, Digital Equipment Corporation and Nixdorf Computers. They both were founded around the same time in the 1950s. They were as computer manufacturers, and they both had initial commercial success in the 1960s with these devices which are called mini computers. So these are not quite as small as the personal computers that appeared in the 1980s, but somewhat larger than that. Now, if we're looking in the data set that I'll describe a little later into the advertisements that Digital Equipment Corp placed in the 1970s, they were placing ads for things like employment manager jobs, programmer analyst jobs. Around the same period, also in the 1970s, Nixdorf Computers had placed ads for technical typists, field service engineers, as senior cost accounting clerks. And in a way that I'll make a little bit more precise as we go further, the jobs like programmer analyst represent newer vintage technologies than those of technical typists. So if we're comparing DEC and Nixdorf Computers around the ads that they're placing in the 1970s, the ones that DEC were placing were a little bit newer vintage. Now, what does this have to do with the innovativeness of the two firms? So we can kind of get at that question by asking, well, what does the future hold, look beyond the 1970s for DEC and Nixdorf Computers? And their futures, their 1980s and 1990s, were substantially different from one another. So Nixdorf Computers, they had largely missed the personal computer revolution. The 1980s was a period of relatively slow growth and then decline. On the other hand, DEC had a relatively successful 1980s. In the 1990s, they were bought out by Compact Computers, which was then purchased by Hewlett-Packard. So the point here is that when comparing these two firms, they differ not only in the types of job ads that they were placing in the 1970s, but what their subsequent 10 or so years look like. So DEC had faster sales growth and more successful next few years compared to the Nixdorf Computers that had relatively older vintage job ads. Okay, so that's one point. So at a given point in time, even firms of the same cohort, they could have different vintage job ads, and those job ads are reflective of the firm's future. As time progresses, new firms enter the industry. So we have Data Resources, Inc., another computer related firm. This is founded 15 or so years later than DEC and Nixdorf Computers. And they bring with them even newer vintage jobs. So research assistant, market research manager. These are job titles that Data Resources, Inc. was posting in the 1970s. And again, using measures that I'll describe in a little bit, these are newer than those of the previous two firms. Okay, so there are kind of two things here. Well, first, that the vintages or the types of ads that firms are placing, they tell you about the firm's future. But then second, as new firms arise, there can be kind of an additional churn in the technologies that are being used or the types of jobs that firms are hiring for. And so these are kind of the main research questions that we're going to be asking, kind of generalizing the points that I made in the previous slide. So first, how do hiring decisions reflect new technology adoption? Can we generalize this example of DEC versus Nixdorf Computers to say that firms that hire for newer vintage jobs, they're innovative in other dimensions, and this innovativeness is kind of predictive of their future performance? And then second, we'll ask, having established that these job ads are reflective of innovative activity, we'll ask, what are the sources of new technology adoption? Is it through new firms coming in, like this Data Resources, Inc., replacing exiting firms that are responsible for the updating of the types of work that people do? Or is it that incumbent firms there, as time progresses, they are updating the types of jobs that they're hiring for, and kind of by association, the technology that they're using in production? Okay, so these are the main research questions.
Can I
Please,
just,
yes.
sorry,
Thanks.
just ask a quick question right now.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about how long those two companies were existing before you started to collect the data? Is DEC, for example, a relatively, new company at that point in time, where Nixdorf maybe was already existed for 20 years and was all, did you have any of that kind of information?
Yeah, so for this particular example, these two firms, they were both kind of began right around the same time in the 1950s. And more generally, as I'll describe a little later, what we are going to try and do is to actually collect information on when each of the individual firms in our sample, when they were founded.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, I just see your first dot point now. I missed that before.
No. Thanks
thanks.
for highlighting that. That's great.
So Enghin, can I ask another one about your first research question? So would you also be commenting about the direction of causality? Is it that you hire these new positions and that's why you adopt new technology, or new technology makes it necessary to hire these positions?
Yeah, so that is unfortunately something that we're not going to have much to say about. Our view is that the direction of causality could really go in either direction. So perhaps firms are limited by the availability of workers that can implement technologies, and so that would have the direction of causality going one way. Or you can obviously tell a story that would be in the opposite direction, or there's just something unobservable about the firm that is causing it to both hire for specific types of workers and employ specific types of capital that are complementary to those. So,
is it not the case that often there's a chief technical officer, and the chief technical officer in, say, a startup or even a larger firm will both introduce a new technology, therefore, catalyzing the startup or fostering the beginning of the company, and then that'll lead to both different hires that will complement the CTO in addition to the new technologies coming in?
Yes, so for sure that could very well be the case in many instances. So for us, we are going to be thinking of this measure of the jobs that firms are advertising for, not as a measure that causes them to be better in the future, but is some measure that says that, okay, like other measures of innovativeness, like R&D expenditures, like patenting, it's a measure of innovativeness that in some instances you may. Oh, sorry.
No. Sorry. So you're using it. Really, the story is a case of not a causality one, but rather that it's an additional indicator that one can use to judge the trajectory of a particular company at a certain point in time.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way to say it. And this measure, it may have some advantages over existing measures. So maybe R&D expenditures you can only compute for publicly traded firms. Maybe patenting is relevant only for certain industries, and maybe there's like defensive patenting and things to worry about. So we'll argue that in some ways that this measure is nice, and that it can be measured for any firm that is doing any hiring. And it's a measure of technology adoption that's comparable across industries and across time. And as we'll see, that there are maybe some differences qualitatively in this this measure that we're proposing relative to existing measures that may be kind of interesting to think about.
Can I ask one other quick question?
Please, yes.
Yeah, I think it's going to make a difference here whether these firms are formed because they enter the market with new technology. I mean, I think of Microsoft, for example, right? So Microsoft enters because it has an operating system no one else has. so it starts with a technology advantage. And it seems to me that a firm like that, it's very different from a firm like IBM, which starts, as you said before, in the 40s really. And it starts as a typewriter manufacturer and a manufacturer of calculators and various things like that. And so you can see a natural gradation into you know, high tech. High tech, but Microsoft, I think, is going to be very different, right? I mean, it starts with a bunch of young folks who are tech heavy with a technology and enters the market that way. Whereas firms that are evolving over a long period from one product to another are going to behave rather differently. And I would think that would be reflected in their hiring pattern as well.
Yes, so for sure. And so we're going to try and measure the extent to which entrants are bringing new technologies with them, like Microsoft, versus firms like IBM that have been around for a much longer period of time and that have renewed the types of jobs that they're hiring for. We're going to do so with a way that you know, involves a lot of kind of aggregation of the many different types of jobs that IBM and Microsoft are hiring for in kind of a relatively simple but maybe two-course way, but it'll try and capture both of these possibilities. Okay, so let me be a little bit more specific about what we do. So with regards to the first question, we're going to look at a set of ads that were posted over a long period of time in 3 major newspapers within the US. So we're going to look at ads from the New York Times, the Boston Globe, and the Wall Street Journal. Our data set is going to consist of slightly more than 5 million ads. From each advertisement, we're going to extract the job title that is associated with that ad. And for each job title, we're going to construct a number of measures describing how new or old is this job title relative to the other ones in our data set. The main results from the first part of this presentation will be that job titles provide a new measure of firms' technology adoption that are correlated with some existing measures, but there are going to be some differences, both in terms of their correlations with firm age and future growth, but then also in terms of which sets of firms can we actually construct these measures for. And so we're going to find that there's substantial heterogeneity in the mix of job title vintages across firms, even when looking within an industry, within ads that are placed at a given point in time. So like Nixdorf Computers and DEC, there are going to be pretty substantial differences in the newness of the ads that firms are posting for. In a number of ways, the new measure that we're proposing is going to kind of be correlated with existing measures in ways that make sense. So among firms that are publicly traded, where we can compute things like R&D intensity and sales, firms that post ads for newer vintage work jobs, they have higher R&D intensity, faster future sales growth over the next 5 or 10 years. They patent somewhat more frequently, and so forth. Second, those that post ads for newer vintage jobs, they enter more recently. So again, this ties back to our example. We have Data Resources Inc., the newer firm that entered in the 1960s as opposed to the 50s of the other firms. When looking kind of in the 1970s, they post ads for newer work relative to the 2 incumbents that we had looked at in our example. And then second, firms that post ads for work, newer vintage jobs, they're more likely to survive into the future. So firms that are posting ads for disappearing work practices, they're more likely to exit in the next 5 or 10 years, as we'll see. Okay, and then corresponding to that second research question, what are the sources of new technology adoption? And so here we're looking at entry and exit versus incumbent technology updating. To answer this question, we're going to estimate an industry equilibrium model where there are heterogeneous firms. So these firms are going to be heterogeneous both in terms of when they first entered the industry and then their marginal costs. So just to account for the fact that there are wide dispersions in marginal costs, where the main decision of incumbent firms is, okay, how much am I going to spend or invest to update the vintages of the technologies that I'm using to allow me to survive in the industry. So at some point in time, perhaps IBM was a firm that engaged in typewriter-related technologies to become a maker of mainframe computers, or maybe even well into the future after that to become a data analytics firm, and needed to kind of change kind of what its main business practices were. And this involved some temporary costs to make those adjustments. So this is kind of the main decision that firms are facing. And what we're going to do is to estimate the costs of kind of firms when they're upgrading these technologies versus the costs of kind of entering de novo.
Enghin, a quick question. Can I have a?
Please, yes.
So when you're talking about heterogeneous firms, are you implying heterogeneous marginal cost of a same product or heterogeneous product?
Both. So firms are going to be producing heterogeneous products, and at the same time there's going to be an extra dimension of heterogeneous marginal cost, which will make it such that even firms that have at a given point in time the same vintage technology, maybe they have differing incentives to upgrade their technology. Yeah, sorry if it's a little opaque at this point, but it'll be clear as we go along. The main result from this exercise will be that both entry and exit and incumbent technology updating are important for the overall churn and the technologies that are being used in the economy. And as the kind of more precisely, each margin is going to account for approximately half of industry technology updating. Let me pause for other questions. Okay, great. So in terms of contribution, we're building on a very, very large literature that looks at innovation and technology adoption. There are a number of empirical papers that look at adoption incentives within individual firms or industries for a handful of technologies. So this Grillikis paper looks at adoption of different, I think it's seed varieties among farmers, and kind of this literature goes on. Or at aggregate technology adoption rates, looking across countries and across industries, but not exploring heterogeneity within firms. So our contribution here is going to be to present measurement of firm technology adoption across multiple industries over a long time period when looking at firm level decisions. And then in addition, there are models of technology updating, either in terms of product innovation or building on kind of these Schumpeterian models, or decisions on if I have capital stocks of different vintages, how do firms decide on kind of the appropriate vintage? And our contribution here is a new question, namely that between decomposing kind of the importance of entrants versus incumbents in updating of vintages within industries. Okay, so the outline for the remaining 50 or so minutes, I'll describe to you the data set that we use and our job vintage measures. I'll try and provide some evidence that this job title vintage measure is an indicator of innovative, high-skilled activity, that when looking across firms, job title vintages are predictive of future firm performance. So there are a good measure of firms' innovativeness or of the types of technologies that they're using. And then I'll answer this question about the extent to which updating of technologies occurs via entry and exit. All right. So let me show you a page of ads that will appear in our data set. So this is from the I think it's April 21st, 1960, New York Times. So on the left side of this slide here, we have the kind of picture of ads as it would have appeared if you were to have kind of opened the newspaper on that day. So we see, for example, here an advertisement for a transportation advertising supervisor, for a performance engineer. So you can see some job titles here, maybe the firms that are posting the ad. So here we have Socony Mobile Oil Company or United Aircraft Corporation. So this is the picture is now what we're working with. Instead, what we're working with is what's on the right part of this slide. We have procured for each ad that was posted in the New York Times between 1940 and 2000, the digitized text. And so if you look kind of on the right portion of the slide, we have again our transportation advertising supervisor, our performance engineer, and again, here's the firm United Aircraft Corporation and Socony Mobile Oil Company, etc. Okay, so in past work, what we did is take the digitized text like it was on the right-hand part of the previous slide. And in this past work, we figured out, okay, what's the job title for each ad, the educational requirements for each ad if they appear, and the sets of tasks that workers perform and the technologies that they use. So just to kind of give you a plug of this past work, the thing that we were interested in is measuring, okay, for each individual occupation, say an accountant or an economist or a welder or whatever, are the sets of tasks that workers performed in the 1940s and 50s, did they differ a lot from the sets of tasks that they performed in the 1970s, 80s, or 90s? In other words, to what extent do individual jobs have they changed over time? And is this to some extent, to the extent that there is any change, is this linked to the introduction of new technologies within different occupations? Okay, so new measures that that weren't a part of this previous work that we'll have to collect here is we're going to identify the firm name and the posted salary, and this posted salary will only kind of be there for a fraction of ads. And then, since we want to link firm characteristics to other existing data sources, we're going to kind of name match to either CompuStat, if this firm was ever publicly traded, For all firms, we're going to do our best to hand collect the dates at which they were born or which they exited. And as best as possible, we're going to link firm names to patent grantees. All right. So on this slide, what we have listed is the same set of ads that appeared a couple of slides ago in the a little bit kind of more difficult to read text. And we have highlighted a few pieces of information that we've been able to extract. So first, for each ad, we've identified the job title. So here it says Times Accountant, but kind of in a future step, we'll remove the word Times. So this is kind of erroneously text that's related to the phrase New York Times, but we have Times Accountant, Mechanical Engineer, our Transportation Advertising Supervisor ad that I had highlighted before, and then also the Performance Engineer. So that's one piece of information. Second, we have for the for two of these ads, we have in these rectangles included the firm that we've been able to pick out. So Mobil Oil Company, I guess we missed the word Saucony here, but Mobil Oil Company or United Aircraft Corporation. Third, in red, we've kind of picked out if in any of these ads, the ads link or mention a education requirement. So here in red, we have that the performance engineer is required to have a master's in science degree. And then finally, in the last piece of information that we've been able to kind of extract here is an occupation code. So for each job title in our data set, we have some method that will link that job title to what is called a standard occupation classification code. So just an occupation code that the US Department of Labor uses to classify different jobs. And this will be useful if we want to kind of compare within a given occupation group newer versus older vintage jobs.
Sorry, just a question.
Please, yes, thanks.
I'm assuming you have, like, you match each of these job titles to an existing database, right? So what's the percentage of matches that you get?
The percent of which variable?
For the title of the job title.
Well, I think that's so something that's a little bit difficult for us to even answer. So the one reason in which we won't get a match of a job title is something that we need to do. So going back here, you can kind of tell, okay, so we have on this slide here, mechanical engineer, methods engineer, transportation advertising supervisor. If you look on the right-hand side here, it's a little bit difficult to tell exactly when one job ad ended and another one began. So we have some methods to try and identify those kind of breaks, the boundaries between individual job ads. But as you'll see here, we kind of have missed the methods engineer job ad. It should be somewhere kind of here in the text that we haven't kind of picked out. So I can say within this one example, we've kind of been able to pick out 4 of the 5 job titles, but I guess we haven't done anything more kind of systematic, more systematic audit. But I think that would be a good exercise for us to.
Can I just follow up on that?
On your linkages of these companies to to Wall Street, to the S&P 500 or something like that. Now, my feeling is that probably professional service companies are not going to be strongly represented as publicly listed companies. Accounting, law, many ad agencies, mining services. So these things change, of course. I mean, now we have some law firms that are publicly listed and ad agencies, but my guess is that this is a relatively recent phenomenon. So my question is, what sort of representation do you think you have in your data across the spectrum? Is it skewed towards excluding services? Because, for example, you mentioned DRI, that was Data Resources. They started out selling economic forecasts. That was a service company. I don't know if they ever listed DRI. What's your comment on that, please?
No.
Right, so we're going to, some of our exercises are not going to, you know, for any, I think, okay. The measures that the job vintages that we're going to pick out, we can definitely do that for firms that are publicly traded or not. And the comparisons that we can make about firm age and their survival, that also doesn't rely on publicly traded status. So in that sense, I think this is in some sense an advantage over of our measure over those that can only be computed for publicly traded firms, to the extent that, you know, services are less likely, service firms are less likely to be publicly traded. But getting back to you, I do think that, so we do have a large number of firms that are both manufacturing and services in our kind of broader data set of firms that we just kind of construct these measures for. We haven't compared that to the kind of overall population of firms that were that were present in this period, but I think that would be useful to do. Yeah.
Well, it could be important
question?
Shed some light. It could be important to shed some light on, you know, is the stylized fact that services are lagging in productivity, is that true or not at the individual firm level?
I think that would be an interesting exercise. We haven't done that, but we can definitely compute these vintage measures that I still haven't kind of told you what they are yet, but in manufacturing versus service firms.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for these suggestions.
Sorry, can I just follow up on the last 2 questions? I mean, on the most recent, on Ken's question, I think there's something going on in the background here which you need to have some kind of allowance for, and that is in effect the deindustrialization that's going on throughout this period from the 1960s. And this is not just happening because technology is advancing more quickly in firms that remain, It's happening in part because standardized technologies are fleeing the country and going to where they can be done at lower cost. And so you're getting a major transformation of the content of your data. I would think that is the industrial mix that you're covering here, and therefore the employment mix as well. So you're going to get a whole lot less machinists in the 1980s than you would have had in the 1960s, for example. And it seems to me that you need some mechanism, and I presume you'll tell us about it, that will explain that or account for it. The other point relates to the question before, which I didn't quite get your answer to. I mean, there is a technical issue here, isn't there? I mean, you have a taxonomy or a classification of employment, of jobs, and the words that are used in these data are rarely going to be exactly the same as the elements of your classification. Right? So the question is, how do you fit one into the other?
Yep. Okay, so let me answer the first question, which is about changes in the mix of broad occupations or industries over time, which definitely is a kind of big kind of factor of the labor market of the second half of the 20th century. So I hope this is satisfactory. What we're going to do when discussing these stylized facts relating firms posting of job ads and their subsequent performance or other firm characteristics is we're going to look at, in some cases, conditioning on the industry in which the firm operates and the broad occupations that the firm is hiring for, using these occupation codes that are highlighted in red, and sometimes not, and seeing kind of to what extent do the patterns that I kind of summarized at the beginning of the presentation, do they hold when you condition them or when you don't on industry or occupation. And then the second question is about okay, so there are going to be some job titles that are going to be in our data set that don't fit existing taxonomies of occupations. How do we deal with that? So we have developed or applied an existing model that linguists use to determine the similarity of different words to determine, okay, for each job title that exists in our data set, which occupation codes do we link it to? So let me give you an example. So say for this sake of argument that econometrician is a job title that appeared in our data set that isn't a job title that exists in existing taxonomies of occupations. Maybe it does, but say for the sake of kind of this answer that it doesn't. What we have done is say, okay, like econometrician, what word is it closest to within the taxonomy that the census or the Department of Labor uses to classify jobs? Let's kind of, once we can compute the similarity of these different words, we can kind of link each job title that exists in our data set to a given occupation code. Did that answer your question?
Is this a digitized process? You certainly couldn't be doing this by eyeball. Right?
No. So there is some, it is a digitized process whereby one can compute the similarity of any given set of words based off of phrases, yeah, kind of where they appear, what context do those words appear in.
Right. So, for example, you look at the page you're showing now, transportation advertising supervisor. there are 3 words there. Every one of those words implies something a little bit different about how you might classify that position, right? You could be in the transport sector, or you could be an advertiser, or you could be a manager who supervises, right? So this is a difficult one.
I for sure agree. And this is, so this code, there would be no way for you to know this, but this is a particular occupation code that is linked to a transportation, someone in the kind of broad transportation set of occupations, in kind of the supervisors among those. So
okay,
for sure, I completely agree.
But so critically, that one fits, right? So you actually have in your taxonomy that particular expression, so that one fits well. That's what I get from what you said.
Well, so there may not be in the census listing of job titles associated with this code the exact phrase transportation advertising supervisor, but what our algorithm does, it says, okay, transportation supervisor, maybe that is in the existing taxonomy, maybe advertising supervisor is as well, and so it has the kind of, our model has to make some kind of guess about which one is closer to.
So for the econometrician example that you had, did your algorithm allocate econometrician to economist or statistician?
I think economist.
Very good.
So, well, yeah, I should check on that. Please, yes.
The dot occupational nomenclature that the United States uses was first started in 1938, right? And it's been in different formats from 1938 until the present day. So an electronic engineer in 1938 is obviously very different from an electronic engineer today. Do you use ONET to standardize the occupations through time, such that the similar tasks are being conducted?
So I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that, please?
So I mean, the dot, the occupational nomenclature
oh, yes.
the United States uses starts in 1938, right? And it changes over time.
Sure.
And in terms of how different occupations are classified. Can I assume that you harmonize the jobs across time, such that, because obviously an electronic engineer in 1940 is conducting very vastly different tasks to an electronic engineer in 2020?
Right. So for the purpose of this paper, we're going to treat electronics engineer as a job that is, and I know this isn't true, a job that is comparable between 1940 and 2000. So I know from a past work that I had described to you that different jobs, you know, the electronics engineer of 1940 and 2000, it has the types of tasks that workers are performing have differed between those 2 points in time. And so, and that's something that our analysis isn't going to focus on. Instead, what we're interested in doing is for maybe I can tell you exactly what we're doing. We're going to compare electronics engineer to some other similar job in that same occupation group and compare those different jobs here. Okay. So before I talk about this figure, let me just recap. So what have we done? We have
just a quick.
Please,
so I'm assuming this algorithm that you're using is some sort of machine learning thing, right? So can you comment on how it was trained, or with what kind of data?
Yeah. Okay. So that's great. So what we did is we took all of the. Okay. So the algorithm specifically to link job titles to these occupation codes, or yeah. So what we did is we took all of the text that appeared in any of these job ads over our 60-year period, and we applied what is called a continuous bag of words model. And what does this model do? Its goal is to say, for any 2 words in our data set, or for any 2 words in our data set, how similar or different are those 2 words? And the idea of this model is to say that, well, we know that economists and econometrician, they're relatively similar to one another since they appear in similar contexts. So within these job ads, economist and econometrician, they both appear near other words like data, like business, like, I don't know, research, etc. And so we have some method based off of where words appear in our text to say, okay, these 2 words are so similar or dissimilar from one another. And then we said, okay, let's take these job titles, each of these job titles, how similar or how different are they to the words that appear in the job titles for each occupation in the Bureau of Labor Statistics taxonomy of job titles. Okay, so just to recap, so we have different ads that were posted over this period. We have the job title, we have the firm, and then we have from other data sets, other firm characteristics. So the thing that it's that we still have yet to describe is, okay, how new or how old are different job titles? And the way that we're going to do that is just for each job title, we know the distribution of when this job title appeared in our database. So we have 2 job titles here that broadly correspond to accountancy jobs. So first, one job title which is called a comptometer operator, and then second, a job title which is called a figure clerk. And so what we're plotting here is throughout our sample period, what are the share of ads that correspond to each of these 2 job titles? So first looking at comptometer operator. So this job was around both before our data set, was before our sample period, and then also in the beginning years. In the 1940s, roughly 0.1% of the ads in our data set had this comptometer operator job title. The frequency or the share of ads corresponding to comptometer operator jobs increased up until the 1950s. And then this job became relatively less and less prevalent over time, whereby 1980, almost no job ads were for this comptometer operator job. Just as a side note, a comptometer, this is kind of like a machine that, a mechanical calculator that can do like very simple arithmetic, like adding and subtracting, but has struggles with multiplication or division. Okay, so one job title kind of appeared mainly in the 1940s and 50s. And then second, we have a second accountancy job, a figure clerk, which was not so prevalent in the 1940s and 50s, was increasingly advertised for in the 1970s and then faded from use. Okay, so we have 2 job titles that appeared at different points in our sample that involve roughly the same set of work. Both are accountancy jobs. And we're going to, based off of the distribution of years in which these job titles are advertised for, we're going to construct 3 measures. So first, the first percentile of the years in which the job was advertised for, the 50th percentile, or the 99th percentile. So we're just going to construct quantiles of the years in which each job title was advertised for as different measures of the vintage of the job title. And going forward, I'll use the phrase year of emergence as the first percentile of the years in which the job appeared, or the year of disappearance, or of the 99th percentile of the years in which this job title appeared, to describe the kind of overall vintage of the different job titles. Okay, are there questions?
Okay, so just a quick question about the for some jobs, the title changes over time, essentially the same job. Are you able to fix that, your identification?
So what I'll describe to you in a bit is an exercise that indicates that, okay, there are newer and older job titles. One may think that, okay, maybe this is just like a relabeling of the same set of work that workers are doing without any actual meaningful change in what people are doing. What I'll describe to you is when we have this kind of change in the language, other characteristics of the jobs are also changing. So newer work, so it's not just as if there's just kind of a relabeling of work that has no kind of economic content. Does it? Did this get at your question?
Yeah, it seems to me what you're looking at is really a category of jobs, right? In the same way. So one title really is a category of jobs because the title changes over time, but probably for the same, exactly the same work, but with different title. For example, like a salesman, nowadays typically they call it consultant.
To some extent that is happening. It'll be, that is true, but what I'll argue is that it's not just that there is kind of meaningful differences when job titles are changing. It's not just kind of a cosmetic change. And how one could distinguish between the cosmetic and actual changes in job titles, I don't know how one would do that, but I think that's something to think about.
Can I ask everyone to hold on to the questions? We have another 15 minutes to go, and we still have a lot of slides to go through. So, thank you.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so our sample, we have processed around 5 million ads. There are 9,000 unique job titles. Among the 5 million ads, there are a couple 100,000 for which we have identified the posted salary, another 250 or so thousand where we identify the posting firm, and among these 80,000 correspond to firms that are publicly traded when they're doing the posting. And we're still working a bit on kind of increasing these counts here to try and extract more ads for which we can identify the posting firm. Okay, so first kind of pattern, how much dispersion is there in job title vintages? So what we do to kind of answer this question, we say, okay, so for each year of ads, so let's look just for the ads in, let's say 1975, let's compute the average job title vintage measure among the ads that are posted in 1975. Relative to this average, what is the dispersion in this year of emergence measure or the year of disappearance measure? Well, it's roughly 6 or 7 years. So to say it another way, if you're looking in our sample, among the ads that are posted in a given year, there's maybe a 6 or 7 year difference in the years in which those jobs first appeared or first exited from our data set. If you do have clarifying questions, please do. Sorry, it's fine if you ask. Okay, so let's look at kind of what do these emerging job titles look like. So what I'm doing here is for each of the final 5 decades of our sample, we describe the most frequently appearing jobs that first emerged in that portion of our sample. So these ads in this first panel here, or these job titles in this first panel here, these are job titles that which first began appearing in the 1950s. So things like legal secretary, administrative assistant, programmer, management trainee, these were jobs that weren't present in the 1940s, but then kind of were in the 1950s. So if you can kind of like look down in this second column or first column, you see, okay, in the 1970s, jobs like paralegal, typesetter, and then word processor, those appeared first in the 1970s. Then if you're looking at now in the 1990s, jobs like power builder, and then maybe some jobs related to the internet, they first appear in the 1990s. Okay, and you can do the same, something similar with jobs that are disappearing at different points in time. So each of these 5 panels, they say, okay, let's look at a different decade in our sample and say, okay, what were the job titles that commonly appeared in our data set, but that had disappeared in a given decade? So here we have in the 1970s, let's say, stenography related jobs. They were really prevalent in the 1970s and before, but not after. Well, what are some other ones? So long distance telephone operator was prevalent in the 1940s and 50s, not so much after that. Office boy on that, okay. All right. Let me skip this. So what have we done? We've described our data set. We've described this measure of job titles when they first appeared or disappeared, or when they tended to appear in our data set, and that's kind of the vintages that we're going to be looking at going forward. So the next thing that I want to do is just to tell you that this job title vintage measure, it's a measure of innovative, high-skilled activity. So it's not just like we're relabeling salesman for sales consultant, and that's the same exact job. That when one job title is being replaced by another, there are kind of other kind of special characteristics about the jobs that are job titles that are newer. And the way that we're going to kind of demonstrate that is by the following regression. And so we're going to relate some characteristic of the ad besides the job title. It could be either the posted salary, the mentions of an undergraduate or graduate degree requirement, and then kind of another measure that I haven't described it until now, but that we also have collected, mentions of an information technology. So within the ads, we've kind of picked out whether the job requires that you know how to use Unix or Lotus 123 or Fortran, or kind of a number of different information technologies. And so we're going to compare these characteristics to the year in which the job title, to these job title vintage measures, controlling for the year in which the ad was posted. So we're going to include year fixed effects, and perhaps occupation fixed effects. So controlling for the broad occupation of the job. So the exercise that you should be thinking about is, okay, let's look at the ads that were posted in a given year in a given occupation. To what extent do newer vintage job titles are they have higher salaries or mention degree requirements more frequently, et cetera. Okay, so here are the results from that regression. So what we have here is different ad level characteristics, either the salary, mentions of an undergraduate or graduate degree, or one of these technologies. And what kind of the main patterns here is that ads that post for newer vintage work practices, they're associated with higher salaries, greater frequency of mentions of undergraduate degrees, or greater mentions of information technologies. And so to the extent that one thinks that, okay, if you need to to be more educated to to be able to work in newer types of work, you should kind of expect this positive relationship. And to the extent that you think that you're going to be better remunerated for having the ability to kind of perform newer vintage work, you should kind of expect to see that this positive relationship between salary and these job title vintage measures. All right. Are there any questions at this point?
Yeah, might be useful to consider the length of life of the job too, which in your nomenclature would be the difference in those two measures, V0.99 and V0.01, the length of life. And that's going to be approximately equal to the differences in your betas here. And they're not some of them are different, others aren't.
I think it exactly as you say. You can almost read those off from the differences here, right? And if you have a prior on what the sign of the difference should look like, that would be very interesting to hear.
No, I don't, unfortunately.
Okay. Okay, great. All right, so this is great. So let me move on to the third portion of this talk. And I guess we won't have time for this part 4, but the third portion of this talk, which we will have time for, is to say that this job title vintage measure is predictive of future firm performance. And all we're going to do here is take for each firm for each year the set of ads that they're posting for and compute averages of these different job title vintage measures. And so, for example, looking at this first equation, look at a firm I in year T, and suppose this firm is posting 5 ads. And so maybe there are 5 ads in this set A of ads that they're posting in year T, and let's just compute the average among those 5 ads of the year of emergence measure, and this will give us our firm year level measure of, okay, how new are the jobs that the firm is posting in that year. And you can do that for the year of emergence measure or the year of disappearance measure, or maybe this what I'll call the median vintage measure, which just takes the kind of the central quantile of the distribution of years in which the job title appeared. And so, again, what we're just going to do is compare these different vintage measures, which are now measured at the firm year level, compare those to different firm level characteristics, controlling, again, for the year in which the ad was posted, the industry in which the firm exists, and to the extent that it's measured, maybe other inputs that the firm is using, maybe the capital stock and employment of the firm, the size of the firm, and maybe the mix of the broad occupations in which the firm is advertising for. So again, the idea is, okay, let's take a firm and let's in a computer firm, let's say 2 computer firms that are posting ads in a given year. To what extent is it that the firm that is posting for newer vintage work practices, do they have different characteristics? And we'll look at kind of different types of characteristics.
But Enghin, won't this way more firms where there's a lot of burn and churn? I mean, people move a lot. Firm with lots of attrition will get a higher value in this definition, won't they? So the idea is, if an economist leaves every year from my university, I have to post the same ad again and again within that period.
Right. So I guess that would depend on, so something that's not clear to me, whether the, well, yes, I don't know actually is the answer to that, but that's a good thing to think about. That's great. Okay, so let me run through some of these comparisons here. And what do we have here? We have different columns will be associated with different groups of dependent variables, these different firm level characteristics, or different combinations of our vintage measures, or whether we do not or do include for the broad occupations that the firm is posting for. You can look at the regression coefficients, but let me, the main results here, we can kind of just read off the bottom of the slide, which I'll kind of just run through for the sake of time. So first, if you're comparing firms in terms of their labor productivity, there's basically no correlation between firms' contemporaneous productivity and their job vintage measure. So it's not necessarily the case that firms that are highly productive at a given point in time are posting ads for newer work practices. On the other hand, firms that are R&D intensive, they are also posting ads for newer vintage work. So a decade difference here, this is what this third column is telling us, a decade difference in our job vintage measure is associated with a 30 log point difference in firms' R&D intensity. So this R&D divided by the sales of the firm. Okay, so first, R&D intensity is correlated with this job title vintage measure. And then second stylized fact that kind of emerges from these measures is that firms that post for newer work practices, they have faster sales growth or revenue growth over the subsequent 5 years or 10 years, even when controlling for other measures of innovative activity. So this could be patenting or R&D intensity. So here, a decade difference in this job title vintage measures is associated with a 10 log point faster growth in sales over the following 5 years, or 16 log points over the following 10 years. And then kind of the third set of facts that I want to describe to you is that firms that post, so younger firms that entered the industry more recently, they post ads for newer vintage work practices more intensely. And firms that post ads for newer vintage work practices, they also tend to survive longer in the industry. So here, these regressions here, the kind of differences between firms when they exit the industry versus their new or old, their propensity to post ads for new or old vintage job titles is statistically insignificant. So something that is not in the slides is we have a kind of an alternate measure of entry or exit, which is not entry or exit from existence, but from publicly traded status. In this kind of alternate kind of set of exercises, we get the same results in terms of sign, slightly weaker results in terms of this entry margin, and stronger results from kind of this exit margin. So let me just kind of tell you or summarize these stylized facts. So newer work is correlated with other innovative activities, is predictive of future growth, tends to occur in young firms. Then this final pattern is kind of different from what existing measures of innovation would say. So patenting, R&D intensity, they actually tend to occur mainly in older firms. other exercises that we have in the paper, but not in this presentation. So new work is associated with being publicly traded, with patenting more frequently, and with having more highly cited patents. And for privately held firms posting ads for new work are more likely to go public in the future. All right, so I think that is, I guess we can kind of jump to the conclusion here. So what have we done? What was this paper about? We provided a new measure of technology adoption that is based off of the types of workers that firms seek. We can measure that through the ads that they post. Our measures are correlated with existing measures of firm innovativeness and success, kind of contrary to some of these existing measures that can be computed and comparable for kind of a wider set of firms. All you need is the firm to be kind of seeking some employees in either print or online media. And these stylized patterns we just talked about. All right, so thank you so much for your great questions and for inviting me. This was a great pleasure, and I will be happy to stick around if there are other questions that people have.
Okay,
so thank you so much.
Thanks, Enghin. And so I think since the time is up, I will officially end the seminar. But if you have some questions, and it appears maybe some of you do, then please stick around. And if Enghin is willing, he can answer your queries.
Enghin?
Yes, please.
I've been thinking about your challenge to me about a hypothesis about the age of an occupation, the difference in your quantiles. Remember?
Could you remind me? I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Okay. We were looking at the early set of regression results. No, go forward. More. Long way more. Next slide. Yeah, that one. Yeah. We've got the year of emergence and year of disappearance. The difference between those two quantiles can be thought of as the age of the occupation. Yeah.
How long it has? Yes. The lifespan.
Right.
Yes.
So could it be that if you've got a longer lived occupation, companies are more willing to invest in hiring people, paying higher salaries, maybe on the supply side, individuals are more willing to invest in human capital because they know they're going to be around using those skills for a while. So maybe the life of the occupation contributes positively to some of these.
Yeah, I think what's a little tricky is that
but there's also a counter hypothesis, right? That if the jobs are stable and they're not going to vanish away anytime soon, then you have to pay them a lower risk premium, right? If the companies know it, so do the workers, and perhaps they will settle for a lower salary. So, I mean, both ways. I mean, I agree with Ken's argument as well.
Yeah.
Enghin, just a quick question. So I'm referring to this recent paper by Echimoglu and Azar, which I'm sure you must have read as well, Endogenous Production Networks. And they talk about that when there is innovation, the product space increases substantially. The possible combination of inputs that you can use across industries increase substantially from say 2 to the power n to 2 to the power 2 n plus 1, which is a big number. So with that, I'm just trying to correlate that with what you're talking about. If there is innovation and if for example, in an industry, you're seeing new job vintage advertisements, etc. Is it possible that you'll see them in clusters in the sense that there's some form of correlation of a new job advertisements precisely because now you have computers, and with that, many different industries are, having the ability to, look out for people who can use them in a different way, and they basically classify them as a new job, which is meaningful, but it's a new job because there's correlation in this product space within and across industries.
I definitely think that there is something.
I mean, what I'm saying is, this is something.
Yeah.
That you can check, right? This is something that you can easily check.
It would be if you take the firms that are in the same industry, or maybe even that are using the same. Maybe the same sets of these technologies, or maybe they're correlated in some other way. Or then you can see, are the vintage measures correlated particularly so for the sets of firms that are kind of similar in these other dimensions? Is that the idea? And then maybe, yeah, or there could be other hypotheses, like maybe firms that are like geographically similar to one another. Maybe they also, there could be kind of like clusters geographically in new work hiring.
Yes, I mean, that's one dimension. The other and more simple dimension that you can investigate this is simply because you have a time series or a panel data of observations. You probably have a spike of new job advertisements every now and then, and you can see if that's kind of correlated. If there's a general increase in new job advertisements in just about every industry because of innovation that kind of spills over to other industries as well.
That's interesting. I see. Okay, so and this would kind of be closer to Ajamolu and Azar. You could like kind of look at industries that are either the same industry or like maybe related in some sort of input-output sense.
Exactly. And I think you're able to do that pretty easily because you already have the measures. You have industries, you have new job advertisements, and I think it's a very easy check just to see if these spillovers actually do exist in terms of technology innovation.
That's a cool idea. I like that.
Can I have a go?
Please, yes.
So most of the examples we're thinking about when we look through your results are, the industries that are moving toward becoming ICT intensive. Right? They're big users, or they're like Amazon, or they're suppliers of high-tech equipment and so forth. And when we look back, the FANG stocks are 25% of the big indices in the US, and it's not surprising that we see this immense growth in those industries. But I wonder if there isn't some bias here, that if we started by thinking about a textile firm, for example. Right? So let's start in the 60s with, say, Levi Strauss or one of these other clothing and textile firms, and then follow what happens with them. And it seems to me that they are subject to a choice that the high-tech end perhaps doesn't have, which is you stay with the standardized technology and you produce it in China, or you innovate and you use computer-aided design and you use robotic manufacturing, and you produce T-shirts in the US that are a lot cheaper than those that can be produced even with low-skilled labor in developing countries. So it seems to me that the pathway, the hiring patterns are going to be very different for firms like that. So, for example, you should observe with these textile firms that they're hiring designers rather than high-tech people who can support sophisticated manufacturing. And they're doing that because they can get cheap labor abroad. Right? Whereas if you're in the heavier manufacturing areas and so on, this may be less easy to do. And it seems to me that this fact biases your results a bit, right? So your results very strongly conclude that these new and future-oriented jobs are the ones that are going to foster better economic performance by firms. But in fact, many firms probably perform very well. They simply diversified internationally because costs were lower there. And because those costs were lower, they didn't need to innovate technologically to the extent that other firms did.
Yes, yes, yes. That's a good, yes, that's a great point. And I'm just thinking whether.
So, I mean, if you've got a, if you've got a sophisticated classification for job types, you also have a sophisticated classification for industries, firms, and so forth. You could put in a control, for example, import competition or something like that.
Yeah.
And that would pick up those firms that are more likely to diversify, produce abroad, and re-import their products.
But in theory, those firms are employing less people in the USA, so they are going to advertise less.
Correct. But they're going to advertise differently, right? So in the US, they're going to have designers, right? But they're going to have their manufacturing-related employment somewhere else. And it's that difference that, you know, those firms might, in fact, perform extremely well by your firm performance indicators. But they are going to appear not to be employing the kind of people who are on the let's say, the manufacturing leading edge.
But doesn't that bias the coefficients in the downward direction to some extent? Right. So you have very good performing firms, but they're not they're changing the job description, but not as frequently, perhaps, or not.
Yeah.
Right. So downward bias the results to some extent, right? It's
possible. Yes, it's possible.
But it's definitely possible to figure out which industries are. There are certain industries which would be just very difficult to offshore, and kind of re-examining the analysis for that subset of industries. That would be a very straightforward thing to do, and I think that's a good check.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get close to the, you know, the China syndrome type paper. There's Author and Co. Right? But I think there is a bit of an overlap between what you're capable of doing and that, which could be interesting.
Thanks.
Thanks.
All right. If you don't have any more questions, perhaps we'll end the meeting now. Cool. Okay. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Next time we'll have you here in person.
Oh, I would love that.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. See you next week. Bye.